Hi, my name is Tony McLaughlin, and I'm talking to Erin McCune from Glenbrook Partners. Erin, thanks very much for joining us.
My pleasure, Tony. It's really nice to see you.
Hey, Erin, you're one of my favorite people in payments. I have to say, let me just start by saying that. And one of the biggest, biggest brains in the US payments market. Tell us a little bit about your background and what you do at Glenbrook.
So, just Glenbrook is a strategy consulting firm, and
Mhm.
we are focused exclusively on the payment space, which is, an exciting world right now, as you well
Yeah.
know. And our customers were based in California.
Mhm.
I'm in San Francisco, but we have people around the United States, and we serve customers all around the world,
Mm.
across multiple time zones. And our work really is across the whole value chain.
Mm.
So all different kinds of payments, all different contexts or use cases for
Yeah.
payments. And we work with the schemes or the payment systems themselves, processors, banks,
Mm.
enablers that serve banks, that serve corporates, merchants, sort of everybody in the ecosystem,
Yes.
whether they're incumbents or new entrants.
Mhm. And
It's it's fun.
And I guess it's getting more fun. It seems like there's never been as much activity in the US payments market. And this heady mix of you have faster payments from TCH, you have FedNow, potentially stable coins, digital dollar, lots of stuff going on. What's your, if you like, bird's eye view of the current state of the US payments market and what are you excited about?
I'm going to answer your questions with sort of a lens around business transactions.
Yeah.
That's
Great.
like a huge part of my practice. And I sort of feel like, although we could talk about consumer use cases,
Mm,
they get a lot of airtime.
you do,
So if you don't mind, that's where I'm really going to
for
focus.
sure.
Um, when we think about this moment in time and business transactions, we're really on the precipice of a real sea change.
Hmm.
There are a lot of difficulties and challenges that have come out of the pandemic and the shutdown and sort of the ramifications
Yeah.
across for consumers and for businesses. But for business back offices, all of a sudden, the reliance on manual processes,
Mm,
on sort of on-premise software solutions that you could only use at the office, um, checks in the mail, like
yeah.
all of that is completely upended. And
Mm,
so you see, even though businesses have always said like, oh yes, we're going to digitize. Oh, we want to do more electronic payments. Every survey they say that. But
yeah.
it takes a lot of energy and focus and resources to transform business processes and
Yeah.
select vendors and all of that. And now what you see is a real sort of business continuity, C-suite focus on the back office,
Hmm.
which really traditionally struggles for resources and
For
IT
investment.
and so there's actually a huge opportunity.
Mm,
And then when we think about sort of the broader landscape, the new real-time rails are really purpose-built for business transactions, right? They have tremendous data capacity.
are you saying then that the normal kind of accounts payable and accounts receivable processes that companies have been running um, in a fairly manual way have really come under stress as a result of COVID? And you're
Mhm.
saying that the business case for digitization is actually there. Is that the kind of thesis that will
It
drive
was,
investment into the back office?
yeah, so it wasn't as though the business case wasn't there.
Hmm.
It's just that compared to other opportunities that a business may have that
Yes.
maybe are more on the revenue side of the house as
Mhm.
opposed to the back office, they typically were always ahead in the queue. So
Yeah.
like, sure, I've got a business case here, but somebody else's business case is bigger and a little bit more,
Bit more flashy.
a little more flashy. Although, there's amazing things happening with enterprise software and applying AI to massive data sets and
Yes.
evaluating creditworthiness and doing matching of
Mm.
really complicated procurement and
Yeah.
invoicing. I mean, there's some sexy stuff going on in the back office.
And
It's not all boring.
how will these developments in the US payments market facilitate better business to business transactions? You mentioned faster payments.
Hmm.
Um, what's the transformation there? Because businesses don't necessarily usually want to pay people any faster. So the transformation is
No,
in the data, right?
it has nothing to do with fast.
Yeah.
It's all about the rich messaging formats,
Yeah.
the shift. Sort of, there's a couple things happening at once. So we have the new infrastructure that
Mm.
has the ISO formatted messages and sort
Yes.
of the data carrying capacity. There is the opportunity to do a request to pay, which
Hmm.
is kind of like a bill.
Yeah.
And that will probably work really, really well for smaller businesses
Mm.
who are disproportionately reliant on checks, who
Yeah.
could then, and don't have the complexity in their invoicing environment, right? They're not going to have multiple line items and
Mm.
volume discounts and all the sort of enterprise supply chain complications.
Sure.
They could use a request to pay and get a round trip payment back that's logically tied to the initial invoice. Like, we think about request to pay in a bill pay scenario, like
Yeah.
a consumer utility type bill recurring transaction scenario.
Mm.
And we tend to think about it like, oh, is this going to get used at the point of sale and displace cards? But the real opportunity is to go after all the small business checks.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be as complicated, right?
Yeah.
Those are for the most part one payment per transaction. I mean, that's huge. And then for the really complicated stuff,
Mm.
you wouldn't necessarily tie it to the individual transaction, the payment transaction, but you would use the ISO remit message.
Hmm.
And that gives you the ability to put a lot of information in there. And
Absolutely.
then as we get, as more and more businesses are using cloud solutions that are all native API, then you get, and the banks come online and move toward real time,
Mm.
then we really start to get momentum.
I really like this notion that perhaps we are focusing too much on the consumer side of payments. Most of the news stories are about the consumer side of payments. Um, do you think also that fintechs are overemphasizing consumer and missing out on a big opportunity in the B2B space?
Necessarily, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot going on
Mm.
in that's business oriented,
Yes,
um, and a lot of like businesses come in a whole range of sizes, right?
of
So
course.
there are, Square focuses on business, right?
Absolutely.
Right. Bill.com, big
Mm.
splashy IPO. That's all business oriented. There's a whole range of solutions that focus on businesses,
Mm.
have become increasingly intensely focused on payments, right?
Yes.
There's all of the virtual card enthusiasm got everybody pretty excited about business payments, but we know that they're not all going to be on card.
Yeah, for sure. And how about open banking, throwing that into the mix? I mean, open banking in many countries has started with the consumer, and in the US, it's still relatively early stages. There's still a lot of screen scraping going on in the US market. What's your take on open banking in the US market for consumers and businesses?
So we're doing it differently. There isn't going to be a mandate. We got a whole hodgepodge of regulatory entities and all that, but we we we're coming at it more from sort of two different motivations.
Hmm.
I think there's a genuine anxiety on the part of the banks that they need to use APIs, use information sharing in order to remain competitive.
Yeah.
So it was sort of a fear motivation, and that's a good motivation,
Mm.
or a good motivator. And then there's all the data security concerns around the scraping and
Yes.
the complication of that happening in tandem with the advent of our faster payment rails and push transactions. Because
Mhm.
all of a sudden the fraud paradigm has shifted and we're protecting access to accounts as opposed to card credentials, et cetera.
Yes.
So that's adding to the anxiety around the screen scraping and
Mm.
the providing your credentials to third parties. So from thinking about the business versus consumer orientation, both businesses and consumers benefit from a much broader range of lending opportunities
Mhm.
and the sophisticated underwriting that's possible when you gather information from a whole wide range of data points.
Yeah.
On the business side, when we think about granting permission to account information, credentializing businesses,
Mhm.
it's a lot. There's the whole sort of know your customer, know your business space.
Yeah.
There's been more, and you know this, we've talked a lot about digital ID. There's been more progress with consumers than with businesses, and
Yes.
really understanding who are the beneficial owners of this business, who's behind this thing.
Yeah.
That we have a long way to go there. So the data sharing should help with that.
Mm.
But I think in terms of the sharing of information and the knitting together of all the different things that are involved in the financial aspects of running a business, whether it's, you might have a bank, multiple banks,
Mhm.
you're going to have lending facilities to manage your cash flow, you're going to have some sort of ERP and accounting that's sort of your system of record. You're
Yes.
going to probably have, depending on the size of your business, you're probably going to have some sort of e-com thing going on. You're
Mhm.
going to have a billing solution. You probably have a CRM. And so the ability to knit that information together
Mm.
and work digitally with a bank to affect making payments in, via APIs through these connected
Yes.
mechanisms, depending on, which of these tools, wherever your payments are originating or how you're receiving payments,
Mm.
there's an enormous amount of potential there.
There's
This is a long
also, it
answer.
seems to, yeah, but there's a lot to it, and there's also seems to me um, a number of things that building blocks that need to be in place
Yes,
to make
it's
this stuff really
complicated.
work well. I mean, one of the things, for example, is you have a privacy law in California which looks a little bit
Yes.
like GDPR.
Yeah.
You don't have that in the rest of the country. And also, in contrast to some other markets, I mean, it may be fair to say that there's not a well-developed digital identity infrastructure in the United States. So I guess each market is coming from a different starting point, which may inform
Mm.
why you're doing things slightly differently in the US.
We're really relying on sort of industry cooperation,
Yeah.
right? So to see the Notcha-led Fixius effort, which
Hmm.
has sort of different elements to it, payment initiation, balance checks, et cetera. They're thinking about a variety of different use cases
Yes.
um, within sort of a set of API suites that I think they're calling a Finis, if I'm correct. They've got all these clever names for things. And then there's FDX
Of
in
course.
terms of another consortium looking really at consistent consumer permissioning
Hmm.
and then helping the banks themselves manage their relationships with the third parties that want to access the data.
Yeah.
Sort of looking at that. So that's another big effort. And then of course the card networks have made acquisitions in this space.
Of course. Yeah. Very, very large acquisition.
Visa and Plaid and MasterCard and
Finicity.
yeah, that's it, Finicity.
Yeah.
Right. So that we don't have a mandate. California, of course, is doing what California is doing, as we're wont to do. And then that doesn't mean it's not happening. It's just happening from, it's more industry led.
Yeah.
And I think what we're seeing is some real momentum.
And then if the picture wasn't complex enough, we add into the mix a lot of discussion at the moment about a potential for a US central bank digital currency. It's not clear to me what use cases US central bank digital currency would solve, or why it's a good idea for the government to provide an electronic payment mechanism in competition with a very thriving, private marketplace in the US. So what's your take in terms of the prospects for a US CBDC? And do you think it fits any use cases that are not adequately addressed elsewhere?
It's hard to offer. I'll just say what's going to happen here. And I don't know how much of it is just talk, how much of it is real. It is emerging all in many, many different geographies. We want to remain a currency of choice. Like if we think it helps our currency remain competitive with other world currencies, that's clearly a motivation. But in terms of what you do with the digital version versus, nobody wants, we have a shortage of coins right now. I think the world is a little bit peculiar. But I think if in a world where we're really like disbursement to consumers and businesses, like in sort of an aid-oriented scenario, I can see there being some utility. But then again, we just went through a whole disbursement exercise, and now most consumers and businesses have ACH credentials on file.
I guess, as you said, COVID has been a great accelerant of the uptake
big
of
accelerant
in the US.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in your thoughts on that, but also I'm interested in, how has your discussion with your clients, what was the agenda pre-COVID and what's the agenda now? Has anything from the pre-COVID agenda survived, or has the focus completely shifted, or is it just about accelerating things that people wanted to do before COVID was a thing?
It hasn't really. Everybody wants to digitize, right? They still want to digitize. Sort of what we do and what we talk about hasn't changed. Some of the emphasis of the use cases have changed, right? Like, but I don't think it's that different. I think that in terms of, I think we're going to see acceleration in places where manual processes and checks have been disproportionately relied upon. So that's my world. That's the business world. Business transaction world. Government, actually, I think there's going to be some very interesting implications for sort of, I already do work around payment enabling eGov, but I think we're going to have a lot more of that, particularly even all the way down into the municipal realm. Because those are very, in many cases, very antiquated circumstances. So, but I don't think that we've seen, like a big shift in our practice or in the areas of focus. We always did an enormous amount of work in omni-channel e-com.
Absolutely. I'm interested in that aspect about, is there, I mean, do you see is there a dash for companies to digitize? I mean, one of the themes I often hear people talking about is the growth of the direct to consumer model, and
Mm.
brands setting up their own
Mm.
store to
Mhm.
sell direct. Um,
Yeah.
is that really a big trend? Is that something which is enduring, or do you think that the once we're post COVID, the old ways of doing business will continue?
I think that will continue.
Hmm.
I don't know why you would. I mean, I think we're going to see a sort of a across the board change. Like,
Yeah.
stores may reopen, and sure, I can go shopping, but why would I go shopping? I
Yeah.
don't have to. If someone is going to bring it to me, that's way better.
Yeah. So it's a troubling time for the physical stores.
Yeah, it's it's a shame.
Yeah.
It's a shame, and I'm in California. We're starting to shut down again.
Yeah.
Just as things started to ease up,
Absolutely.
but it's a big shift. I mean, you know, I coached my mom. She's really good at ordering online now.
Okay. Yeah, I guess necessity is driving those types of
Yeah,
new consumer behaviors.
yeah.
So, Aaron, my final question is, we are living in this strange time. It's impacting, people in California, in London, where I am, in China, everywhere in the world at the same time in very similar ways. What's your reflection in terms of, and you just said that maybe you're going into a little bit of a lockdown again, but
Mm.
assuming we get through this in the relatively short term, what are your reflections as someone who is, running a consulting business in terms of how you operate going forward, but also from a personal perspective, what societal changes do you think there will be, and what do you hope there will be?
I mean, for me personally, this has been a remarkable change. I'm accustomed to traveling
Yeah,
75, 80% of the time.
absolutely. Yeah,
In probably 15 years since I spent this kind of time at home, which
absolutely.
is unprecedented.
Yeah.
There's some benefits to that. Like, you
Mm,
know, I set up my home office. I had a home office. I didn't spend a lot of time in it, but I'm all set up to work and I'm right off my kitchen.
mm.
And, I spend a lot of time working in an apron because there's something in the oven or something simmering. So I love to cook. So that has been wonderful. I think that I think that the shift to engaging remotely and
Mm.
having important strategic discussions remotely is is something that our clients have become much more comfortable with.
Yes,
The, it's still, some of these conversations would be a lot better in a room with a whiteboard.
of
There's
course.
no question.
Yeah,
But the ability to really engage remotely is a big shift, and I think that's valuable.
yeah.
I'm sure I'll travel again. I miss London. I miss lots of places.
I miss San
Um,
Francisco.
and I miss the coming together of
Yeah,
people. And I don't think you can substitute for that. But we're not going to do it for the time being.
yeah.
In terms
Absolutely.
of sort of our work, and I mean, um, I think the consequences for businesses,
Mm.
the shuttering of businesses, the struggle of consumers who aren't as fortunate as you and I, like whose
Indeed.
work isn't readily remote,
Ab-
um, whose employers are not gonna survive. I, I think I've been giving a lot of thought
mm.
to the expertise we have at Glenbrook and how we can apply it toward businesses at risk, consumers at risk.
Absolutely.
What tools, what capabilities are going to be necessary to get through this
Hmm.
and then thrive thereafter.
Yeah.
So, you know, we do a tremendous amount of work in the developing world around financial inclusion, bringing sort of micro businesses and consumers into the formal economy.
Hmm.
Can we take some of that expertise in that work and apply it here and
Hmm.
think about inequality, think about opportunity? How do we use sort of digital tools, digital financial tools
Yeah.
to help bolster and build a new foundation?
Absolutely.
So I don't know what the answers are, but
Yeah.
our employees and my partners and I are are really trying to think through, how do we contribute? What can
Yeah.
we do?
Well, I think it's going to be one of the questions of our age, which is how do we make sure that if we're going to have a more digital society and a more digital economy, that it will exhibit some of these, traits, more equality, more inclusiveness, more opportunity for everyone, um, and the less, because one of the things about the digital economy is it's a winner takes all economy often, as we can see by the concentration in wealth in some parts of the economy. But I
Mhm.
certainly share those sentiments, and I'd just like to end by saying that it's always a privilege to hear your thoughts, Erin. Next time we will do this over, a fine meal in San Francisco or London. And thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us today.
It's, it's great to talk to you, Tony.
You too.
Stay healthy, stay well.
Thank you, Erin. Bye.